It's okay, right? Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, so sorry about that. Sometimes you encounter this technical hiccups, but I think I got it figured out. So it's fine now. So we have about 8 minutes to go. You guys should tell me something interesting and the live chat, or even if you have your questions, you could just go ahead and then type in your questions over here. So once I'm done, then I take a look at your questions, and then we'll be done for today. So today's session is actually going to be in it's going to be for 1 hour. uh, I'll spend about 45 minutes to go through whatever I want to do today, which is basically about layout grid. And then the next 15 minutes I'll be taking your questions. Then I think you'll be good. Thanks a lot for your feedback about the sound. Yeah, it was terrible. Okay, so who do we have next? We have Agal Garimond. Okay, so we have Dragos, and then we have Osai Prince. Okay, anyone joining soon? Hi, Anaya. Okay, so 6 minutes more. I'm glad you guys really made it here. I'm sure it'll probably be late in other parts of the world. Today, so in Ghana right now, it's time is 3:54, so 6 minutes more to be 4 o'clock. Then we can get going. And I think I should let you know this. I live very close to the airport, so I most of the time have planes passing by. So whenever it passes and it's a bit loud, I'll have to pause for some few minutes or seconds and then continue from there. I hope that's okay with you. Yeah, thanks, Prince, for the feedback. Okay, so 5 minutes more. Hey, Prince Hagan, nice to have you here. You guys should let me know where you are joining from. Especially Dragos, and then Roll of Us. I hope I got your name right. So sorry. And then we have, okay. So can I be seen? Can I be seen now as I wasn't signed in? We are in the UK here. Oh, great to have you from the UK. Okay. And where else? Who's joining in? Okay, so 4 minutes more. Let me go get some water. I'll be right back. Hey, now am I saying? Okay, so I'm back. Okay, so we have 3 minutes more to go. And who else is joining in? Okay, so 2 minutes. Okay, so 1 minute, 1 minute more. Okay, so once again, welcome people to today's webinar. We are going to be talking about layout grid and WYSIWYG Web Builder. So I think I can start now. So let me just go ahead and then get started with my slides. So today's webinar is going to be about WYSIWYG Web Builder layout grid. Let me just reduce my head a little bit. Okay, I think this is okay. So yeah, and this is basically what you are going to be looking at. So we'll be looking at the interface of some basic interface of version 15 of WYSIWYG Web Builder. We also take a look at what layout grid is, and then we take a look at some properties of layout grid, some basic designs with layout grid, and then we look at layout grid best practices. Then I'll take your questions, and that would be just about it for today. So the duration is going to be 1 hour, just like I said earlier. We'll have 45 minutes for the webinar itself, 15 minutes for questions, then we'll be done for today. So as I'll be going on, if you have any questions, kindly send them in the chat section. I'll have them all compiled, and once I'm done with my 45 minutes, I'll go ahead and then take a look at your questions so that we go through them one after the other. And I think that's just about it for now. So I think we can get started. So if you have any questions, in case I doubt you'll be able to cover almost everything, layout grid is a bit broad. So then if you have any questions, you can always reach out to me through info@dapsonhml.com. You can send in your questions, and I'll try my possible best to answer them for you. So that's just about it. Let's go ahead and then get started. So I'm going to go ahead to launch layout grid in WYSIWYG Web Builder. Before then, so this is WYSIWYG Web Builder version 15. There's actually an update today. I don't know if you've seen it. There's a new update. If you haven't updated yet, you can update right after this webinar. So there's version 15.05, which was released about, I think, 4 hours ago. So let's get into today's business. So if we are taking a look at some basic layout of Web Builder 15, it has a couple of new features that it come with, which I find them very cool and useful. There's one particular feature in here which is under view, which has to do with the view or the layout view of your canvas, in case you want to switch to that is design layout. So design layout will basically position your canvas in the middle. So whatever you do, any object or two you bring in here is positioned in the middle of your canvas, which I find very cool. So you can't go beyond this side, but for the right hand side you can go beyond, because you can keep objects outside your canvas. So that's one cool feature in there. And then also we have there's a refresh button somewhere. Let me just see if I can find it, which allows you to be able to refresh your entire page or canvas whilst working on it. Let me see if I can find it. Okay, so that's it under here. We have the refresh that allows you to refresh the content in your page in here. And then also when you come to the block section, there are lots more blocks that has been added, which makes it much easier for you to go about your design process. Now most of these blocks were built with layout grid. So let me just drag one onto the canvas, and then let me just drag this here. Oh, it looks like let me just, okay, so that's it. you realize if I try to move this down, it goes back to the top. So that's one property of the layout grid, which we'll take a look at shortly. So there are a couple more blocks in here which will help you go about your design in a very fast and an easy way as well. So that's just about some few things I wanted to share with you in here. Now one may ask, what is layout grid? So to give you a proper definition of layout grid, let's go ahead and then take a look at the help section of this application, which has it rightly explained here. So let me just search for layout grid. Then let me go ahead and double click on this. So if we look at the top, it says the layout grid can be used to create flexible multi-column layouts that automatically adapt to the screen size. Okay, so a grid can have 12 columns with sizes and percentages, and then objects that are dragged onto a grid will automatically become floating. So the floating is one property of the layout grid. So whatever object you put in the layout grid automatically more or less becomes adaptive to that particular grid you have in there. So that's one. And then also, okay, so if the object does not fit on the current row, then it will be wrapped. So that's if you are working with text, you're more or less going to have this particular wrapping with your text in there. And then some objects like images, text, blog, photo gallery. Okay, so can be with full width. Okay, so we take a look at that also with the layout grid. And then for smaller screens, all columns are stacked based on defined breakpoints. So most of the time, if you are working with the default layout grid and you switch to the responsive mode, that the mobile aspect, you have all objects being stacked on top of each other. But you can actually tweak that, and we'll take a look at that shortly. So I think now one useful tool with this particular application has to do with the help section. Now the help has almost every single tool in there covered. So I actually fall back to this particular feature almost every time that I am being faced with some challenges going about a couple of things with this application. So I think once you're trying to figure out something and you don't seem to understand or get it right, just go ahead and then take a look at the help section and you should be sorted out. So that's just about that. So what's next? Let me see what's okay. So you come to the layout grid itself. I'm going to switch my canvas back to the default, which is the web layout, so I get this entire space to myself. Now let me come to the toolbox and then let me search for the layout grid tool. Sorry. So this is the layout grid tool, and just like I was saying, or I read from the help section, it has this floating and adaptive property where once you bring it to the canvas and then you begin to move it, it's automatically going to switch back to where at the very top of the canvas, unless you have another layout grid in there or something with the floating property. So we take a look at some of the tools that can have floating property. So with the layout grid, to get the properties, you just simply double click on it, and then we have a couple of options or properties in here which we will take a look at. So at the first section at the top, we have the column. So just like we read earlier, you can have 12 columns with a layout grid. So I can go ahead and hit on add, and so I get 12. So I have 12 columns in here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And when I click on OK, this is how it's going to look over here. I can place objects within each column I have in here. So that's with the columns section. Now one cool thing I find about these columns is that each and every single column has its own properties attached to it. So to get to the properties of a column, you can select the column, hit on edit, then it takes you to that particular property where you get to specify the background. So in case you want to change the background color, so let me just go ahead and change this to solid, and then select a very deep color. So let me just select this, and then go ahead and hit on OK, and then hit on OK. So as you can see, we have that particular column bearing this particular color we set that to. So you can do that for each and every single column in here. You simply select the column, you hit on edit, or you can directly get into the properties by double clicking on the column. It takes you to the properties, and then you can change the background property. You can add a border, as well as you can come to the padding. So padding is basically space around an object. So let me just go ahead and then increase this to about 20, 20, 20, and then 20. Let me click on OK. Click on OK. So once I position something inside a particular column, let me just come to the toolbox and get a text to. So once I move something into this particular grid, let me just come. I think I did that for the last one instead of the. Okay, so let me just be sure where I did this. Okay. Okay, so I have it here instead. So let me move my text here. And as you can see, because I set the padding to 20 pixels each, there's this spacing here, this spacing, this spacing, and this spacing. So my text becomes very tiny. So let me just go ahead and then delete this in here. So let's come back to the properties. And then so as you've seen, you can get to the properties of each and every single column in here. Now let me go ahead and then remove every all the columns. Let me just come back to the two columns, and then also you can adjust the width or the size of each column in here by simply moving your cursor to the middle of the columns, and then you can move it to the left hand side to adjust the size of it, as well as to the left or to the right hand side to adjust the size of it. So let me just change this back to the default. And then when you come to the bottom, so you can use this to add columns. You can remove columns, and then you can edit the properties of each and every single column in here. And then also we have the positioning, which has to do with the how you want objects to be aligned in each column. So let me just show you that. By default, we have the alignment of the horizontal aspect. Horizontal we know has to do with going this way, and vertical this way. So let me just go ahead and then position something into it. You realize it will switch to the left hand side of the grid. So let me bring the text to in here, and then once I bring it here, I think it's not really visible. Let me just increase the padding. I will come back to the padding shortly. And then let me change the background property from solid to transparent. And then let me change the size of this text to about 30, so it becomes visible. So you realize this is actually I think you won't get to appreciate it more with the text. Let me use something different. So let me come here and then look out for the shape 2. So I think I should find the shape 2 somewhere here. Let me just search for it. And then once I bring it here, you realize it's switched to the left hand side of the grid. Now once I double click on this, select this particular column, and I change the alignment to right, the column the shape is actually going to go to the right hand side of this particular column of the layout grid. So that's what you have this particular function doing here. And this also is also the same thing. So this has to do with aligning objects in a vertical way. So it is disabled because we haven't enabled a certain property here. So if you want to get this enabled, you come to the very bottom, and then you change the grid system to CSS grid, and then as you can see, it's enabled here. So you can set your object to the middle, to the top, as well as to the bottom. Let me change this back to default. So that's it. That's with the alignment here. And then the next thing we have has to do with the overflow. So the overflow allows let me just search for the meaning of overflow so that I get this right. So this is what I get from Google. It says the overflow pattern is a technique used in fluid web design to expose more content as a screen real estate becomes available. So what it's basically saying is the instances where when you are working on a project, let's say the default project for a desktop, and then you are switching to mobile aspects, because of the kind of content or the number of content you have on the maybe on the desktop, trying to switch to the mobile aspect, it sometimes creates some kind of scroll bars in your page on the mobile aspect, depending on the properties you set, and that has to do with the overflow. So when you come here, you have hidden, you have 100%, you have custom, you have none. By default it's on none. Now I most of the time use hidden, because once I change this to hidden, what it does in the layout grid is that each and every settings I do on any breakpoint is independent of that of a different breakpoint. So we'll get to that. We'll get to use that feature in here, so you get to appreciate it more. So let me just switch this back to none. Then we have the miscellaneous section. So we have the layout. So the layout can be fluid. So by default, it is set to fluid, and then you can have it set to a fixed width. So a fixed width is actually going to have a particular size that you set to it. And then we have the gutter. So now the gutter is basically the spacing we have in here. So by default, once you drag a layout grid to your canvas, it has 15 pixels gutter. So let me just change this to 0 and then click on OK. So as you can see, it takes away the gutter or the spacing we had in there. Now the spacing or the gutter, once I set this to 15, it is created around the grid. So it is created on the left hand side here. We have it here, as well as it is created for this particular column on the left hand side and on the right hand side. If I move this here, you realize I still have my spacing in here. So I can just duplicate this and then position it here. And as you can see, I have 15 here, 15 here. So in total, you have about 30 pixels of gutter. So that's with the gutter here. And then the next thing is the breakpoint. So the breakpoint has to do with responsive web design, which we'll come back to shortly. And then we have the semantic. So the semantic is basically, this doesn't really do add any kind of special feature to the grid, but this helps with more or less, should I say, search engine optimization, because if you specify that whatever content you have in here is an article, it helps search engines, determine what kind of content you have on your website. So that's what you most of the time will likely to use the semantic section for. By default, it's always on div. So div is basically a container or a section that objects or content are being kept in. So you can leave that on div, or you can go ahead and change that. And then we have the position. So the position, by default, because it has a floating property, it automatically goes back to the top. Whatever object you position inside is going to bear the floating property as well, until you change that to maybe header fix. So in case you want to use this particular grid as a header, and then you want it to have some kind of fixed size and maybe stay wherever you want it to be, then you go ahead to change this to header fix. And then we have the footer as well, and then you have sticky. So sticky, let me just change this to sticky. So sticky has this kind of, should I say, funny property whereby it doesn't go automatically where the grid is supposed to be. It takes some few seconds to get in there. This normally happens when you're using layers. I don't know if you've used layers and then you've had the layer mode set to sticky. And then let me just go ahead and preview this in a browser and take a look at how that is going to behave. Okay, I have my browser in here. Let me refresh this page. Okay, so it doesn't really do anything here, but I think you might be able to. Let me just change, let me switch to layers so I show you what I mean by the sticky property in there. So once I change this mode to sticky, and then let me leave the delay on 500, and then change the background color to something very solid. Let me just and then go ahead and then preview this. So you realize it was actually somewhere here, but I had to switch to the top. So that's actually the sticky property in there. And then the next thing we have here to the right hand side has to do with the padding. Now padding, just like we saw earlier, creates space around the object and the grid. So you realize when I started, there wasn't any padding. So this was, I think, set to 0. This was set to 0, and this was how it was going to be, because I wanted to create some spacing around the object I have in here. I had to increase the padding. Now you can increase the padding to the top as well as to the bottom. So in case you want more padding or more spacing, you go ahead to increase it. So maybe this can be 50, and then you click on OK. Now the padding becomes very useful when maybe you want to set this particular layout grid to have a background image. So let me just go ahead and then delete this, and then change the grid to, let's say, 1. Remove this, click on OK, and let me double click on this, come to the style, which I'll come to shortly, and then change this to image. Let me just go ahead and then select an image. So I want something very large. This will be fine. let me set this to cover, click on OK. And then when I preview, now one thing about the layout grid is that once you position, maybe you change the background property and then you try to preview it, you are more or less likely not to have or achieve the results you have. The reason is simply because you don't have any object in the grid. So to be able to see this properly, I just have to position this object in here. Now this is, I get to see this because I increase the padding to the bottom more than that of the top. So let me just go ahead and then change this. So I'll set the padding to the top maybe about 100, and then to the bottom also to about 100. I think it's not that okay. Let me change this to about 300 and then 200, and then I think this becomes more visible. Now let me change the background mode for this particular shape to solid, or maybe transparent to do, so that I don't get to see anything. Let me change the border to 0 and then click on OK. Now once I preview this, you realize I get to see the image more as it looks as compared to how I saw it at first. So that's one thing you're likely to achieve with the padding to the top as well as padding to the bottom over here. So I think let me just change this back to 20 or 20, yeah, and then that's fine here. And then we have max width. Now this particular feature seems to be one of my favorite features with a grid. The reason is because you can specify the entire grid to have a particular size that you want it to bear. Now to appreciate this more, let me not put anything in here, click on OK, and then I still have my shape here, right? Now once I preview this, I think let me just change the shape to solid back. I think it was gradient. Okay, let me click on OK. Now once I preview this, you realize the shape comes to the extreme left hand side of my screen. Now this is going to be so based on whatever device I'm using. So even if I change the width of this particular browser, it's still going to be the same because of the fluid property of the layout grid. Now to be able to change this particular feature in here to, let me just get this back. Oh, okay, so let me just, it looks like, let me close everything, let me minimize this. Now to be able to change what I just demonstrated to you, that's when you get to use the max width in here. So in case maybe the entire width of my browser, I want to have my object position in a certain let's say size, so I get to specify that in here. So I get to specify, let's say this is going to be about 1200. I'll go ahead and then click on OK. Now once I preview this, let's just take a look at this. You realize now it is actually sticking to the 1200 I specified in here, and that's one cool thing I find about the layout grid. And then also as part of the sizes you can set, so there's one other size or size you get to set even with this particular 1200 by just simply introducing the dash sign on your keyboard in here. Now what this is going to do is that it is going to cut the entire grid to fit into the 1200 you specified in there. So let me just preview this. So as you can see, since I specified, I placed a dash in there and I still have my width to 1200. It restricted the grid to fit the entire width of the browser. So that's one property or option you're likely to use as part of your project. So let me just come back to the grid. And then the next thing we have has to do with column height. Now most of the time you're likely to stick to auto because as and when objects are being placed, the grid, the height of the grid increases as and when you're placing more objects in there. So you have fixed, that is if you want to set your grid height to a specific size, you can go ahead and then set that, and then you have 100 vertical height and then you have 50 vertical height. So those are the properties, the height properties associated with the layout grid. And then finally we have the grid system, which you have Flexbox. I don't know if you've ever worked with Flexbox before. So Flexbox also has this floating or fluid property just like the layout grid. And then you have the CSS grid, which allows you to perform some specific settings in here. So let me just change this back to default, and then let's go to the style section. Now when you come to the style section, each and every style or options or properties you perform in here is going to affect the entire grid, unlike what maybe you might do it within a specific column, which affects just that column. Whatever you do at the style tab in here affects the entire grid. So if I go ahead to change this to solid, then I specify the color to, let's say, this particular deep blue here, and then I click on OK, you realize it affects the entire grid I have in here. So that's one of the properties that you can achieve with the style tab here, as well as you can set a border to the entire grid if you want to set a border. So you just have to increase the width of the border, and then you specify the color you want to have for the border. So let's say this, and then let me change this to about 10. That'll make it more visible, and then once I preview this, you should see it. So as you can see, we have our border in here. So those are the properties you can actually achieve within the style tab in here. And then the next thing we have has to do with the form. Before I get to the form, there's predefined style in here. So in case you want to create your own kind of styles that you want to apply to the grid, you can go ahead and do that with the style manager. So you come to the style here, and then this is the style manager. You can hit on add and then create your own style here by going through the properties available in here, so that it's applied to your grid. Once you are using the style here, once you select a style here, what you have at the bottom is going to be faded out because you've specified your own style, which is going to be applied to the grid in there. So let me just change this back to none and then stick to this. And then the next thing we have is form. Now, if you started using WYSIWYG, I think from version 12, this feature has been part of it. Now, what this basically does is it helps you or enables you to convert your grid into a form. So when you want to have a contact form on your website, and maybe you built your contact form with the grid, there's no need for you to come back to the toolbox and then bring the contact area to use as your contact maybe form to be able to submit or configure the contact form. But you can simply convert this particular grid here into a form, and then you can come to the settings and then you configure your form. So that's what the contact the form section allows you to do in here. And then next to it we have the bookmark. So the bookmark allows you to I don't know if, let me just use the concept of a book. Can I get any book here? I think I have a book. Oh, it's not there. Okay, so a bookmark, I believe you know what a bookmark is. It's simply you trying to mark a section within a book. So on your web page, you can actually achieve something like that. So once you enable the bookmark, all you're trying to say or do is you're calling this particular grid a mark or a section where if you create a link, you can actually link it to that section. So once you click on that link, you can get to that particular section with the bookmark property in here. By default, the grid is actually bearing the bookmark property. Let me just show you what I mean. So let me disable this. Click on OK, and I'm going to introduce a navigation object in here. So I'm going to come to the navigational section. Let me see if I can find CSS. So let me just bring the menu here, and then let me double click on this. Now let me just close this back. So once I come here and then I double click on the menu, and in case I want to link this to something, first of all I'm going to select page within this project, and then you realize that the bookmark section, it's enabled. Once I click down here, I get to select this particular grid. Or what this is going to do is that once I click on this particular item 1 menu, it is actually going to take me to the section of this grid on the page. So that's what the bookmark is doing. So just like I was saying, by default, this the grid is automatically a bookmark object as part of its property. So you can go ahead and then select that. But what the bookmark will enable you to do, which I'll come to shortly, let me just move this, try to bring in another grid in here. So let me bring this and then position this at the top here. Now, as part of the properties of the grid, you realize once I brought in a new grid in here, it comes to stick at the bottom of the grid, which is already in here. To be able to move it on top of this grid, all you have to do is to right click on this grid, and then you come to the move section. So you have to move to bottom, move to top, move down, move up. So I want to move to top, so this is what I'm going to use. And then what I'm going to do next is I just want to be able to demonstrate what the bookmark property, which is in the grid here, is going to allow you to do. So let me just increase the height, the padding for this to about, let's say 500, and let me just increase this to maybe 200, and then let me preview this in the browser. Now you realize I linked this to the grid I have in here. Once I click on this, it is going to take me directly to this particular section. You realize how it happened. It jumped straight to that particular section. Now I'll take a look at this. Once I change this, so if I double click on this, and then I change this to when I enable this particular smooth scrolling here, and then I preview this again, and then I click on this, you realize it took some time. Like, it was a bit smooth as compared to this one, which will just jump you right in there. So that's what you're likely to achieve with this particular property in here, which is under the bookmark section. So once you enable this, you get to set some kind of transition to the grid here. So once a navigational object is clicked on, it takes some time before it gets to that particular grid. So that's what you're likely to achieve with this bookmark here. And then you have events. So events allows you to create some kind of animations, JavaScript properties, and the rest. And then you come to the CSS animation tab, which allows you to create some kind of animation to your grid in here. And then finally, we have dividers, which has been a part of version 15. So this wasn't available in version 14 of WYSIWYG Web Builder. Okay, so once you come to the dividers section, you get to add some kind of dividers. Let me just show you what dividers are in the browser. Let me see if I can get my browser here. So let me go to WYSIWYG Web Builder website, and then let me just close my tabs here. Okay, so let me go to the template section. Let me go ahead to browse the template, and then let me just preview this particular template. Now you realize there's some kind of should I say a shape having some kind of edge hitting here, the same thing over here. So this is actually the dividers that I'm talking about, which is part of layers as well as it's part of the layout grid in here. So let me just double click on this and come back to the divider section. Now you can add dividers to your grid by simply selecting the divider type you want to use. So there are tons of dividers in here. You can actually create your own dividers and add them to this. I'll show you that shortly. So once let's say I want to use, so I go in for clouds, I go ahead to specify the color of it. Let me select a very deep color, and then I want this to display at the bottom, so I think that's just okay. And then it's went to the top. Was that what I selected? Oh, okay, let me select bottom instead. It's still at the top. Okay, because I'm probably using the grid. Let me just flip. Okay, that's what a flip does. Now let me just preview this in the browser so we get to see it. So just as you can see, something like this created, you can actually achieve the same thing using the dividers property in the layout grid in here. So let me just come back to my application. So there are tons of dividers available in here. You can select any of the ones here, and if you want to create your own dividers and then add them to the divider section of the application, let me just show you how you can do that. So all you have to do is to, excuse me, I need to get some water. So all you can do to add your own dividers, let me just show you that. So you come to where the application, once you install the application, it creates a folder called WYSIWYG Web Builder under the document section. So once you expand or open this particular folder, and then you go to systems, you should look in here, you should find dividers. So here you go. So this is the section where you actually get to keep your dividers. The reason why you're not seeing anything for my dividers is because I have changed the default setting or configuration of where my dividers are kept. So let me just show you that. So once I come in here and then go to systems, and then I come to dividers. So these are the dividers. Let me just preview this. So as you can see, this is one of the actually later. This is one of the dividers. Let me just take a look at something different. So as you can see, so these are the dividers. You can actually create yours. All you have to do is you have to save it as SVG. So these are SVG file types, and then once you save them in there, you go to that particular directory, and then you get to copy them there, and then you can have them as part of your dividers in here. Now, if you are going to do that, you should first close the application. You keep your dividers there, and then you come back to the application, open it, and then you should see your divided. So that's just about that. So the dividers you can actually flip. So you realize once when I selected flip vertically, it changed the position of the dividers in here. So it changed this I think upside down, and then if you are using flip horizontal, it will change this to the other side. So you can go ahead and then select this, and it will change it to the other side. So you can just play around with the settings or the properties available in here, and then see what you can actually achieve with the dividers. So I think that's just about the properties in here. So let's just go ahead and then take a look at trying to design something basic with the layout grid in here. How many minutes more do I have? I think I've covered like 34 minutes already, and have some few more minutes to finish up. So let me just close this. Now, with what I'm going to design, I'm basically going to fall on the blocks I have in here, because there are lots of things which has been designed in here. I don't have to waste time to design a lot of things all by myself. So let me just come back to the header section and get some navigational objects I can use in here. So let me just search for header, and then maybe I should use this one. Okay, so I'm going to use this for my header, and then let me come back to the blocks and see what I'll find next. I'll want a different section, maybe more or less like a grid with a background property. Maybe this would do. So this has a background property, which I think it plays a video at the background. And then let me come to what would I find next. I think I'll prefer this. I'll bring up this here, come back to the blocks, and then see, let me see, I think I'll bring this next. I think this was created with layers, so that's how come it's tagged in here. So let me just get rid of this, come back to the block, and maybe follow. I know this is a weird design, but that's fine. And then let me come to the bottom and see if I can get a contact form as part of my let me add some pricing to it. It's going to look very weird. And then let me get contact. Okay, so I have contact here, so I probably would want to, should I use this one? I think this is fine. Let me scroll to the bottom and see. Oh, okay. Okay, I already have my contact in here. Since I double click, let me just, I don't like this one. Probably would want to go in for this one. Okay, so let me go ahead and then preview this in the browser and see how weird it will look. Okay, there are a lot of things going on in here. This is my background property. That's for the video. Let me see why it is behaving like this. This is a layer actually, so let me just delete this. I wouldn't want to use layers in here. Let me come back to the block, and I think there was one I saw. Okay, was this what I was using first? I think so. Okay, so this is also having layers. This is what I was using at first. Let me see what I find. It looks like I have to design my own. Can't find anything interesting in here which I can use for the top section. Let me just take my time and see if I find something interesting I can use. Okay, I think this will do. That's also layers. Let me just get rid of it. Let me come here and create my own. So let me search for layout grid. I'll drag that in here, double click on this, and then increase the pattern to the top about 200, to the bottom 200, and then I'll get rid of, let me just do this again, move this to the very top, and move it beneath, so down one, so that I have my navigational object excuse me, to the top. And then let me get rid of this column. Let me click on OK. Now I'm going to change the background property of this to have an image. So I'll select image, and then I'll go ahead and select the image I was using earlier, and then I'll set the size to cover. So I said I was going to come back to this. Let me just talk about them here. So once you select your background mode, since I'm using an image, it gives me additional properties as part of it. First one is you get to specify the URL or the location of your image by simply hitting on the browse icon in here. And one cool feature as part of version 15 of WYSIWYG Web Builder is you don't necessarily have to get images ready before you can start on a project. You can simply use this particular icon, which is on Splash Photos, allows you to browse photos from unsplash.com so you can go ahead and include them in your projects. Now this works with the internet, so in case you're not having access to internet, you're not going to get access to anything. So let me just wait for some few seconds and see. So these are the images. Let me go ahead and select this, click on OK, and then if you take a very good look at the URL in here, you realize this is actually loading from a site, so this is not on my local system. Then let me just go ahead and then hit on OK. So as you can see, I have a very nice image in here. And when I preview this in the browser, I'm not going to get a size because I don't have anything in this particular grid. So to be able to achieve something or see this exactly, let me just scroll to the bottom, click on my shape, let me just move it in here, make sure it doesn't have any background, it's transparent. Let me change this to 0, and then click on OK. Let me just come back here and then preview this in the browser. So oh, I don't seem to have my image showing. Okay, here you go. Okay, because it was loading from unsplash.com, that's how come it took some few seconds before it showed up here. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to link these sections to the various sections I have as part of my project. So let me just come back here to my application, and before I do that, I think, is this a grid? Okay, so this is a grid. I think this should go beneath. Okay, it looks like I have about 20 minutes more to go, so let me just okay, so now to be able to identify these sections that I have positioned in here, all I have to do is to rename the IDs of these particular pages. So I select the grid I have in here, come to the properties, then I rename this. So this is going to be maybe home. What should I call this? Maybe I'll call this pricing. And then what should this be? Okay, let me just come to the contact section. Okay, we already have contact in here. Now let me go ahead and then preview, go ahead and link them instead. So I'm going to change this to home. Okay, I think this can be profile because I have something in here. So let me just create one, which I'm going to call home. And then I'm going to select my home for that particular link here. Now let me move this up since it's becoming a sub menu here, and then let me click on OK. So I have my home here, and then let me change this one to profile. I haven't, let me just change this particular grid name to profile, and then link this to profile. So I already have profile in here, and then I have scales. Scales, maybe pricing would do. So I change this to pricing, and then finally I have my contacts, which is already contacts here. Now just like I was saying earlier, if I preview this and I click on this, let's wait for our image to load. I click on this, you realize it takes us directly to that particular section, which doesn't really look cool as part of your design. So contact will take us there because, okay, I think contact has some kind of bookmark, it's enabled for the content. Let me just come here and then take a look at that. So as you can see, we have that enabled in here. So all I have to do is to enable for this one also. Okay, it's enabled here, and then enable for this one, and then go ahead and then enable it for this one also. Okay, let me preview this, and then you realize so let me just try to get to one of them. You realize it takes some few seconds and then it gets to them, so that looks a bit cool. And this particular grid this particular grid is being cut here because it has some kind of max width set to it. So let me just change that to nothing and then preview it. It will have the entire width over here. So as you can see, we have the entire width. And then yeah, so as part of the properties, you can set to a background of the grid as you can change the size over here to parallax. So parallax gives it some kind of cool effect once you are scrolling through the pages. So let me just scroll to that section to realize it moves slowly at the background. So that's the parallax effect over there. Now let's come back to our design. So in case I want to restrict the size of this page to, let's say 1200, I don't want it to go beyond 1200. That's when I probably would want to use a minus 1200. So I'll do that for this. Do that for this also. Okay, there's a flex container. Okay, I'll come back and talk a bit about that. Let me set for this, and then finally for this, and then for this as well. Now once I click on OK and preview this in the browser, everything is going to be restricted to the 1200 frame. Now as part of what I can do is I can simply bring in a new grid here. So let me just bring a grid. And then I'm going to bring a shape. I think I already have a shape here. So let me just hide this. So copy this, paste it here. And then I'm going to bring this to the bottom. Now I'm going to keep the height of this, let's say about 50 pixels or 50 is, I think 50 is fine, or maybe 40 is okay. And then move it into this grid here. And I'm going to duplicate this grid. All right, click on it, copy, and then I'll paste it. I think I copied this instead, so copy, then paste this, and I'm going to move this to the very top. What I'm going to do is it's going to give me some kind of spacing at the top. So realize at the top of the page we have some kind of spacing, and then at the very bottom we have some kind of spacing. So this is also going to help you with your design process. In case you want to create something like this, you can go ahead and create something like this. Now when using layout grid, you can also use master pages with layout grid. So a master page is a page which is going to bear some settings which is likely, or properties which is likely to appear on almost all the pages. So basically you're looking at the header as well as the footer. So if I want to add a master page to this particular project, let me just duplicate this page and then come in here. So I get rid of all what I don't need here. So I'm going to have this as my master page. Let me just go ahead and then add a footer to it. I think let me get a footer from here instead. This looks okay. Okay, so let me restrict this also to 1200. Okay, I think this is 1024. Was that what I said? I think minus 1200. And then I'm going to move this particular grid to the very bottom. And then I have to introduce one property or two in here, which is the content placeholder, which is going to allow me to load objects within that particular section. So once I'm bringing a content placeholder in here, you realize it is not having the fluid property. So to be able to make it have a fluid property, I have to double click on this and then change the overflow to floating. So once I do that, it is going to come here and it's also going to bear the fluid property. So to be able to have it in between the header and then the footer, I have to move it up a bit. So move this back. Let me keep moving it back. And as I'm moving it back, something is actually happening. If I come to the object manager, you should see that this is, oh, I should move it. Should I move it forward? Okay, let me just try keep going back. Let me move to the back and see. Okay, this moves it to the top. I want to have this to the very top first, and then this to the move this up, and let me move this to the very top. So you realize there's some kind of movement as I keep moving them up and then to the bottom. And then I'll come to my index page, and then I'm going to get rid of this. I don't need this also. And then to the very bottom, I don't need this. All right, click on this, go to the page properties, and then I'll come to the miscellaneous section, which I'm going to select or specify my master page. So I'm going to click on select and then select this page. Now there's one property which is very important in here that says if you're using master frame, this one requires a content placeholder, and that was what I brought onto the page 1, which is my master page. Now click on OK, and then once I preview this page, I should have my navigation. So I have my navigation here, I have my footer here as well. Now, as part of the tools that you can work with using the layout grid is the layer tool. You can actually work with the layout tool using the layout grid. But if you are using the layer tool, so let me just come to the toolbox. If you are using the layer tool in here, by default, it doesn't have the floating property or the fluid property. To be able to use it with the layout grid, you have to change this to have the floating or the fluid property. And once I do that, it automatically, bears the floating or the fluid property in here. So I can just go ahead and then expand this, then change the background of this to maybe something a very deep color in here. Click on OK, and then once I hit on preview, it is automatically going to have I think something happening here. So let me just change this to the page alignment to center, and then come back, preview this. I think it will still be the same if I don't do that for the master page also. So let me come back here, change this also to center, and it should be in the middle. Looks like it's not being in the middle. Let me just try to see what may be causing that. Let me just change the alignment here to center, and then there is a direction also here. Let me change this. Okay, I think I'll leave the direction to left. The direction has to do with the object we place in this particular layer, so I'll just change the alignment, and then this should be fine. Oh, we still have this switch to the left hand side. Let me just try to enable relative horizontal size and see how that is going to look in here. Okay, I think this looks okay, but what if I want to have it within this particular frame? Let me see how best I can go about this. So let me take this off. So I don't want full width, maybe default is fine. Let me select clear left and see. Still have this. Okay, I think the reason is because I'm specifying the width of the grids I have in here to 1200. If you take a good look here, realize I specified the width to 1200. The width of the actual page is not 1200, so I'll have to change this to 1200. So let me change this from 970 to 1200. Click on OK, and then expand this to fit 1200. Let me change this back to default, and then I think this should be fine. Still moving to the left hand side. I don't know why it's keep going to the left hand side. Let me just change this alignment to center, preview this again, and it's still to the left hand side. All I wanted you to know is you can actually work with layers using layout grid. So you can, if you are going to work or use layers as part of your layout grid, you probably will have to change the settings in here to floating. And then you realize earlier on we saw the flex grid here. So let me just search for the flex grid. So the flex grid, there's flex container flex grid. Let me click on flex grid, which also has the floating or the fluid property that you can also work with using that as part of layout grid. So you can specify your settings. Let me set this to solid to have a very deep color in here. And then once I preview this, it is going to be fine on the page as part of the layout grid. So those are some of the tools you can work with using the layout grid in here. Now when you're working with layers, in case maybe you've brought a layer in here, you've changed this to floating, which is going to work okay with the layout grid. One thing you should know is that you can't move this into a layout grid. That's one of the things you should know when you're working with layers. Even though you change it to floating, you can't have it inside a grid. So you can have a lot of tools over here. You can position a lot of tools in here into your grid, but there are some tools which are restricted from having in the layout grid. So one is the layer tool, which you can't have in the grid, and then also the form area tool, which I also believe shouldn't work in the grid. Let me just bring this here. So once I try to move it into the grid, it's not going to go in there. So that's one of the things you should know. You should know when you're working with the layout grid. Let me just come back here. Now, when you're working with grid, you can actually position grid within a grid. So what I mean is, in case I want to have this grid inside this grid, you realize once I move it on top of it, there's a blue edge around this particular grid. So it means I can have this particular grid within this grid. And also one thing you should also note is that if you are working with grid within grids, you can't have more than one grid within that particular same grid in here. So what I mean is, if I bring this grid in here, and let's say where's that thing, let me just get that again. If I have this grid in here, let me set this to solid, maybe this, and then I want to position this particular thing. Let me just come back. I want to position this particular grid within this grid. Realize I left it there, but it's disappeared. The reason is because you can't have should I say two grids, or a grid within a grid within another grid. So all you can do is you can just have one first level grid within a grid, and in case I want to add this particular grid, I can position that in this particular parent grid, which I can have it come here, and I can keep adding on. So I can move this grid here, I can have this grid in here, but I can't have this grid within this grid. So that's one thing you have to know when you're working with the layout grid. And you can create almost any kind of layout with the layout grid when using layout grid in your project. So let me just change this back to 1200, and I think that's just about it with the layout grid. There's more to layout grid, we can't cover everything. Let's just take a look at the form section. So if you take a good look over here, let's take a look at how the form was built. So let me just move everything out so that you'll be able to create your own form. You don't necessarily have to fall on this form created in here. So you realize this is a parent grid here. It has a grid within it, it has another grid within it, and then this parent grid is set to have the form property. So you enable the form where you get to configure it with your email address, a success page, as well as an error page. So let me just click on OK. Now let me just come to the toolbox and get my own edit field here. So I'll click on it, I'll bring it in here. I'm going to move it into my grid I have in here. So once I move it into the grid, you realize it automatically adapts to the grid I have in here. In case I want to bring another one, I just copy this and then bring it in here. You realize this is actually not having any spacing in between them. In case you want to create a spacing, all you have to do is to just right click on this, look out for margin. So I'm going to look out for margin, and then because I want to create space between these two edit fields, I'm going to add a margin to the bottom of this particular edit field. So this is going to be about 10, and then once I click on OK, you realize I have a space in between in here. So you can go ahead and then copy this, paste that here, move it within this particular grid, and then in case I want to implement him, I can just move this to up so that it gives me the spacing I want to have in here. And then we have the content or the edit, the text area, which is also the same thing over here, as well as you have the button here as well. Now one thing you should notice that you realize all these things are actually not together. This is having a different grid, this is also having a different grid, but at the end of the day, one thing which is making it possible for this to be a complete contact form is they are all within one grid, which is set to have the form here. So once I configure this with an email address, and then I publish this to a domain, and then I go ahead to fill out the edit fields or the form details, and then I submit it. It's automatically going to be submitted to any email address I configure the form with. So that's one way you can go about creating forms. You can create amazing different kinds of forms. So if you take a look at the blocks in here, let me just go out for form. You realize there are different sort of forms which has been created. They all have different designs. So I can come back here, bring about something different, and if I preview it in a browser, should see it over here. So you realize this is actually created, it's having a different styles compared to that of what we have in here. So that's one way you can go about working with forms and layout grid. Now one property or option you can achieve with a content placeholder when working with layout grid is you can actually add some kind of box shadow to this. So let me just double click on this and then add some kind of, let me add this to, let me change this to like 4. This is going to be dark, and let me increase this as well as this, and then let me preview that. Let me preview the index page and see if it's going to take effect. I know when you're working with layers, it gives you some kind of box shadow around there. It looks like it's not really taking effect in here. Let me just come back here and see if there's something I have to do more. So box shadow, this outset, which is supposed to be outside. Okay, index, this is bearing -1200. Everything is fine in here. It looks like it hasn't really worked with the grid, but this is, you can actually achieve this using layers. Let me just create a new page, and then I'm going to have just a layer in here. So I'll move this, I'll double click on this, and I'll set this to the floating property, and then I'll I don't think I want to do that. Let me change the alignment to center. Click on OK, double click on this, and then change, let me just leave the background color to be that, and let me expand this like 1200. That's the page width, and then click on OK. Let me expand this to 1200 here. Let me go ahead and then set the master page to the page I created. So this is page 1. Click on OK, and then once I preview this, they should have some kind of box shadow. Okay, so this is moving to the left hand side just like I had earlier on. Let me just come back to this page. Let me get rid of what I have in here. Get rid of this as well. Get rid of this, and let me preview this page. I don't seem to have the box shadow being applied to this. Oh, I think let me just come here. Let me come here, make sure everything is right. I don't need any background. Floating. Set this to left. Click on OK. Come to page 2. Change the alignment to center. And let me just preview this and see. Okay, let me just try this with version 14. Sometimes there might probably be some challenges with version 15, which, because it was released quite recently, there are some slight issues you're likely to encounter when you're working with it. So let me just go ahead and then clone this page, get the layer 2 here. Okay, let me just expand this, come to this page, get to the toolbox. Let me bring the contents placeholder. Let me double click on this, box shadow to okay. Let me come here, set my master page, and then preview this. So you realize we have our box shadow around the layer in here. Let me try it with a floating property to see if it's going to work. And this should be floating also. Let me just preview this. Okay, looks like it doesn't work with a floating property. So that's one thing, that's one feature likely to use when you're using layers instead, so not with layouts grid. I think my time is up. Yeah, my time is up. So this time around, I'm going to be taking questions, and then I'll answer them. So let me just go ahead and take your questions, and then see how best I can answer. So mind you, I won't be able to, probably I may not be able to answer every single question, but let me just go ahead and then take a look at what you have for me. No question. Okay.
Somebody was asking, finish my work.
Okay, so let me see. It says things you might see and small. Oh, okay. So I think that has to do with the responsive aspect. I almost forgot about that. Let me just come back here. So when you're working with layout grid, you can go ahead and then create breakpoints. Let me just go ahead and then create breakpoints here. Let me create for 320, 480, and then let me create for, let's say 980. Let me click on OK, click on OK. So let me switch to the breakpoint. And you realize once I switch to the breakpoint, automatically it has this adaptive property which allows the whatever layout, whatever object is in there, switch to fit the entire width of that particular page. And then once I come to the next breakpoint, you realize, so this is what I was saying earlier, it gives you the stacked objects on top of each other. So in case you want to change this, you don't want to have it this way, all you have to do is to double click on this grid. And then because I'm in the 480 pixels, in 480 I don't want to have it this way, I'll just change this to 320, and then it gives me this particular default layout, just like I was seeing on the desktop aspect. So that's how you can go about changing the objects which are stacked on top of each other. Now one thing you should know is that if you don't have enough spacing or space around your object, this is not a good option to go with, but you should know that you can actually achieve something like this on all the breakpoints. So once you come to 320, you can change this also. So let's just say 300, and then let's change, let me just leave this. Now you realize I still have my objects in their respective columns. And then also we were talking about the overflow. So this is when the overflow becomes important to use, in the sense that whatever I do in here doesn't affect the default grid. So once I have this set to hidden, by default it's on none. If I change this to none and I click on OK, and then maybe I change the gutter to like 40, and then I switch to the default, it is going to have was that, I think, let me just change this to 40. So this is 40, this should have 40. So you realize this has 40, this should also have 40. So that's 40 in there. But if I come here and then I enable this, I turn this to hidden, and then I click on OK, and I switch to this particular grid, and then I go ahead to change this to 20. Then maybe I come in here, I change this to 10, and then I come back to the default. You realize this has its 40 sets here, this will have its 20, and then this is going to have its 10 set to it. So that's with responsive aspects when you're working with the layout grid. There's more to layout grid. Time is really limited for me to cover almost everything. It's like it's 5 o'clock already over here. I've spent more than the time I was supposed to be. So I think let me see if there's any question. Yeah, there's no question. I think that's just about it. Come again. Yes. So the video is going to be available for you to be able to watch it over and over again. So so I think that's just about it for today. So all right, guys, thank you very much for making time and then passing by to be able to attend this particular webinar. I wish I could cover a lot. I wish we could even cover, maybe design something very unique and beautiful with layout grid. Maybe you should suggest something, a very nice design you probably would want me to design with the layout grid, and I'll try my possible best to have that done and then record that as a tutorial and then have it published. So that's just about it for this particular video or this particular webinar. Thank you very much for watching or for passing by. Once again, my name is Ishmael Lamte and I'm signing out.